So hey everyone, welcome back. So today we are diving into something that can save you a lot of headache when you are debugging your code or when your code encounters a failure. So we'll be talking about error handling in Python and how do we achieve it? We achieve it using the try blocks, right? So let's talk more on this. First create a file, new, and we'll say Python file. We'll name it as exception handling.py. Right, so what we are talking about exception handling. All right, so let's talk about the basic syntax. How do we write a try block? So anything or any code which you feel might result in an error, you have to put it under a try block. So it's the syntax is try and you write your code here. You'll say risky code. All right, and then you'll have something called as except. It is nothing but it will accept any exceptions which is being raised. All right, so you'll have the code to handle the exception or error. So this is simple try and accept block. All right, now slighter more variation, or let's say extended version. Try accept is you have a try block here, all your code is written here, then you have a accept and you say accept and you specify a type exception1. Okay, and you have your code to handle exception1, and you have accept exception2, and again you have your code to handle exception2. Similarly, you have a else block. Everything is small, else, and you'll say what if the code worked fine, then what are you going to print? So you're going to print whatever, say you, so code ran with no exception. All right, so this is your else block, and towards the end you have your finally block. What finally is, your finally block will always get executed no matter what happens. Okay, so this code is always executed. All right, even if there was an exception raised or even if there was no exception raised, finally will always get executed. All right, so in the real world, where do you need these? Where do you need exception handling? So you will have to have the script wherever you are trying to prevent any program from crashing, right? So you write everything in your try block, and then if anything goes wrong, it will again get into accept, and you can execute finally accordingly. We'll see those examples going forward, right? Or you want to handle, say in this example, when we saw in line 11, if you see we have one exception handled here, second exception handled here. So if say there are certain exceptions being raised and you want to handle them or you want to treat them differently, so how do you do that? So you are going to use different code blocks to handle different type of exceptions. Okay, and say this finally, and where you want to clean up your script, right? After your code has executed, you want to close all the files that you had used. So you're going to put that in finally, regardless of whether the code was executed successfully or not. Finally will always do a check that whatever file you have opened is closed here. And we'll talk about certain exceptions that we can raise, the common ones. Okay, we'll talk about them towards the end of this session. So let's take an example of ticketing system. Okay, ticketing system. Now first one, we are raising an exception. Raising exception. So my first thing will be try sorry, everything is small, try, and I will try to take an input with number of tickets, how many tickets you want to book. So let's say num underscore ticket is equals to what I want an integer value here, right? And I'll say input the number of tickets. So what I'll do, I'll just print the number of ticket is num tickets. Okay. And we, since I am going to accept only integer, if there are any values which are not of type integer, I will throw an exception saying this is a value error. So I'll say accept value error. All right. And I'll print the value you have entered is not a not a number. All right. Now let's run this. So it's asking me the number of tickets. I'll give 6 first. All right. What happens? 6 is printed correctly. All right. Now for the next one, I'm again going to run it and I'm going to enter some string value. Okay. I'll say 6. I'll hit enter. So instead of throwing an error, what it gave me the value entered is not a number. Okay. Now what happens if you run this without the try and except block? Let's run it here without the exception. So you are going to get a value error for sure, right? Let's run this. Oh, the indentation. Let's run this. So number of tickets, I'll say 6. Hit enter. Print it correctly. Again, I'll run it. I'll enter 6. Hit enter. It throws me what? Value error. Invalid literals for int. Right? So the same exception we have handled it here so that we don't get this technical error. Instead, we give a custom message that this is what you have entered and this is what I'm expecting. All right. Now let's move on to the next one. Let's take the driving test. Okay. Let's take driving test example or driving license. All right. So what we are going to do is we are going to do a age check. Okay. Where if you are below 18, you won't be allowed for a driving license. But if you are above 18, you can apply for driving license. All right. The difference is this time we are not going to do a simple if statement. Instead, we'll try to handle it using try and except block. Okay. We are going to raise an exception. Okay. So let's first define a function. Define, we'll say check age, and we'll say if or age, let's pass a parameter as age, right? We'll check here if age is less than 18. What do we want? We'll say raise. We'll say what exception we want. We want value error exception. And we want a custom message here. Okay. Age is less than 18. We'll say you are not allowed because age is less than 18. Alright. And we don't want else, or else we'll just say print you can apply for driving license. So what we did here, we wrote a function, we had a if statement. If age is less than 18, I'm raising an exception here, and this code will exit here itself, right? And it will go to your except block. Now how do you call this function? So calling this function will always be from a try block. Try, and we'll say check age. All right. And we have accept value error as E, and we are saying error. So what we are doing, we are calling this function. If there is any exception raised, it will be caught here, and we are printing that exception here. Okay. Let's run this. What happens? One sec. I didn't write the print statement correctly. Okay, let's run this. So it's saying error, you are not allowed because your age is less than 18, which is true because I gave the age as 10. Now, if I give the age as 18, will it allow me? Let's run. You can apply for driving license. Clear? So this is how you can raise an exception by your own. Now, similarly, you raised a value error, right? Now, let's see. Let's take the old ticketing system that we were looking at and we'll see another example here. Now, let's say you want to book ticket, but the maximum number of ticket that is allowed is 5. You cannot book beyond it. Okay. Then how do you handle it? How do you handle it? So again, we'll have a function which will do this thing for us in a similar fashion how we did the driving license example. We'll say def book ticket and we'll take the number of tickets we want to book and we'll say if number is greater than 5, what I want to do, I'll again raise an exception. So this time I'm just going to raise an exception. Okay, so I'll say raise and we'll say exception. And what exception message you want to print? You'll just say you cannot book more than 5 tickets. Now in similar fashion, we'll say print and we'll say let's use the F string. All right, you have 5 tickets booked. Okay, clear. And similar fashion, we are going to call try also and say book tickets and we'll say accept exception as E. We'll print it a string exception, or let's say again same error and we'll say E. All right, let's run this. So you have 5 tickets booked. Why? Because I gave 5 here. All right, now let's take this as input. So I'll say input and I'll use an integer here because I want a number, right? So I cannot take a string from here. So I want the integer value of it. So let's run this. So it's expecting a value here. Let's give 6 and hit enter. All right. So it says invalid literal for int 6, right? That is because the exception is being raised here itself. And what we are trying to do here is we just raise an exception here and this exception didn't had a custom message to it. Okay, this exception was just a part of try block which was raised here itself and it didn't had a custom here message here, but this exception, right? So right now we entered SIX6 which came in here and it was not able to interpret, the int function was not able to interpret it and it threw an error, right, which was displayed using this error. But now if we enter the correct value, all right, so let's enter 6 here. So the value is correct, but as per our logic we'll still get an exception because we can book only 5 tickets at the max. So if I hit enter, I'll again get the same exception. So it says you cannot book more than 5 tickets. So you got the difference. So if an exception occurs here in the try block, the exception is anyways being caught and displayed from the print statement at line 48. All right. But you can also have a custom message or custom exception that you are raising based on your condition, which will also get caught in the exception, but it will have a more meaningful description. Okay. Moving on to the next example. So we had discussed that we can have else block as well, right? So we'll see else block. So what else block will do? Else block will run the code only when the code block doesn't have any exception raised earlier. Okay, let's see an example. So suppose you want to book a ticket, right? So we'll use the same thing. We are going to book a ticket So I have try, and I say number is equals to integer input a number, or enter the number of tickets. All right. And I'll say if number is, let's say, less than equals to 0, because anything a user should enter should be above 0, right? You cannot book 0 tickets. So we'll raise exception invalid number. Clear? And we'll say except what exception we are raising. We are raising exception, right? So we will raise except exception as e, and I'm just printing the exception because my intention is not to get an exception but to show how else block works. Else print proceeding to payment. Now let's run this one. So what happens here? Now again, if I enter 0, so it says invalid number. But again, if I enter everything correctly, so I enter number of tickets as 5 and I hit enter. So what it says proceeding to payment. So since there was no exception raised, this else block was executed. Whereas in the earlier code that we had executed, it just threw me this error and it terminated. All right. So else will be executed only when there was no exception raised. All right. And then we have finally. We have finally block. So when it's finally used, is more like a cleanup activity. I mean, in actual world also, in when you are coding, you will use finally most of the time where you are trying to clean up your script. Okay. So let's say you have, say you want to send a particular log to the system saying whatever have happened in this particular ticketing system. All right. So you want to open a file. In that file, you want to write something and you are closing it. Okay. You are writing it in a log saying that we have booked certain tickets for certain number of passengers under this particular ID. Okay. And you want to write it in your say log file. So what you will do first, you will try to open a file. So how do we do that? So we'll say try. We are going to use exception block anyways. Okay. So you'll say file is equals to open, and instead of a correct file, I am going to give an incorrect file 00, or let's say logs.txt to make it sound more logical. Logs.txt. Okay. So we have this file. I want to open it in write mode. Now I'll say file.write booked 5 tickets. All right. You just want to print this, and you will have a print here. Or let's not print anything. We'll try to take this in except. So we'll have except, and you'll say, now we'll take a custom exception. Say, because when the file is not found, there is a custom exception class that will be thrown. Okay. Which is file not found. So this is again, if you see this name here, it is a built-in and it is a class. So it is a separate exception class. So this class or this error class will be thrown when the file is not found. So we are going to use the same, and we'll give a custom message as well. If the exception is thrown, then we are going to display no such file or directory. Okay. And then in the finally block. Now this is a scenario when we had opened the file and the file is found for now. Okay, let's assume the file is found. We have written it to the file. We want to close the file also, right? So what are we going to write? We are going to write f dot close. Okay. Or sorry, not f. This is file. File dot close. right? But what happens if the file was not at all opened? It will again come in finally block and it will throw you an exception, right? To handle that, we are going to use again a try block. We'll say try, and what are you going to try? You are going to try to close the file, all right? And if the file is not found, if the file is not found, so what are you going to say? You're just going to pass. We have learned about this, right? Pass means you are not going to put any actual meaningful code there. It is just there for the sake of it being there. All right. So let's comment the previous one and let's execute. So before we execute, I'll explain it one more time. So we have a file we are trying to open, but this file doesn't exist in our system. Hold on. Because we are going to open this file, so anyways it will create a file, right? So we'll try to open it in read only mode, and instead of writing, we'll say file.read. So what happens? Because if you give write command, it will automatically create a file and it will show that okay, this file executed and everything will work smooth. So it says no such file or directory, right? And let's take the other example as well, the one which we had written earlier. Just to see whether this particular code block executed or not, we'll say print file closed. Okay, let's run this. What happens? So it says here file is closed, and if you see here, there is another logs.txt that is created, and it says booked 5 tickets. While you are coding or while you are writing a script, a test script, you have to be cautious about what exceptions you can expect. Okay. So the more you think about your code, the more robust your code will be. Now you can also have multiple exception handled in just one except block. Okay. For example, let's take multiple exception. So let's take a simple example. We'll say try, and we'll say number is equals to integer of input, enter a number, and we'll say cost cost is equals to 100. So we are just giving a ticket cost, right? Or let's say ticket cost is equals to 100, and we'll say total is equals to, we'll say, how do we are trying to raise an exception, right? So we'll say total cost or the ticket cost into the number that we are getting as an input. All right. And we'll say except we are expecting what? A value error if we are entering string there, so we'll accept that. Also, if instead of in the number, if we are entering 0, so it will throw you a zero division error, right? So we can handle both of those exception in this particular except block. And we'll say zero divide error. It starts with capital ZERO division error. Okay. And we are going to name it as E. The next thing would be print. Now let's run this. So we'll enter a correct number now. So let's enter 5. Hit enter. Went fine, no error. Now let's enter an alphabet. I'll enter 5. So what it says? Oops, error occurred. Invalid literal for int with base 10. So what do we understand? That's because it's expecting an integer and it's encountering an invalid literal. All right. Now next time we are going to enter 0. Hit enter. Oh, okay. I gave it as multiply here. I should give it a divide, right? Now this is the risky section of my code, okay? Because it will throw me an exception. Now let's run this again and enter 0. So it's again saying oops, error occurred, division by 0, which we were expecting and we have handled it in the except block. Now Now there are certain times or there are certain scenarios where you will have to raise an exception even after you have caught it. Okay, so how do you do that? That is handled using the keyword raise. Okay, so let's say we'll call it as re-raising exception. Now, where do we need these scenarios? Like, where do you have to re-raise this exception? So this is usually a scenario where you are going to send this particular message to your upstream or downstream. Your system has handled this exception, right? But you have to communicate the same thing to the next system as well, that there is an exception being raised in my system. I have handled it, but this is the exception which is raised. Okay, so if we have a custom message, we can use a custom message. If not, we can just raise an exception from our end and forward it to the downstream applications. All right, so how do we achieve it? So let's take the same example and we are going to use it here. The only change we are going to do here is, in my except block, I am again going to say raise. Okay, just the raise. Now let's see what is the difference. Now let's run this. So enter a number. I am again going to enter 8. Went correctly, smoothly, no error. Now I'm entering 8, which is alphabet. Now if you see, I am getting the error message that I am expecting, but also it is raising the same exception here, right? Saying that in line 85, it has encountered an exception. All right. Now, this in a similar fashion, we are going to check for zero divide as well. So I am going to enter 0 here, hit enter. So it says division by 0. Okay. Now we have learned about raising an exception. We can also suppress an exception. Okay, how do you suppress? So we'll see suppressing exceptions. All right. So suppressing exceptions happens using a different class. So we'll have to import what? So from contextlib import suppress, suppress. Okay. Now let's take the file example. So we were trying to open a file and which doesn't exist. All right. So let's say with suppress and the exception is zero division, but I don't want this. I'll write file not found error. And then I'm going to open, let's say abc.txt. All right. So what's happening here? ABC doesn't exist, right? If I just give a command like this, if I'm just running this particular command, okay, let me comment everything else. If I run this, throwing me an error, no such file or directory, file not found. Okay. Now, if I put it inside my suppress block, it won't throw me an error. Okay. So it's like silently try and except is working in the backend. Okay. So if I do this, I don't get any exception. So I'm suppressing the exception that I'm expecting here. Now the last one here that we are going to discuss is custom exception class. Okay, we'll say custom exception class. So we have seen all of these exceptions that we have, the inbuilt ones are a class, right? So to create a custom exception class, you'll also have to declare it as a class. Okay, how do you define a class? So class is, let's say we are doing that 18 the driving license example, right? So if we are doing that driving license example, we are going to have a class called, or an exception called, age too small error. Okay, so let's say we have age too small error. So one thing to note here is we haven't talked about classes, but in the next video we are going to talk about OOPS or object oriented programming, where we'll talk more about classes and methods. But every first alphabet of your word should be capital and there shouldn't be any spaces. All right, cool. Moving on. So we have the class name, we are going to take an exception, and we are doing nothing. We are just passing it, right? I don't want to suppress it as well. Let's comment the previous code. So I'm just passing it. So now Python knows that there is a class for this exception as well. What are we doing in this exception? Right now we are doing nothing inside it. So let's take another example, or let's take another method. We'll say define apply, and we'll take an input as age, and we'll say if age is less than 18, we'll say raise to small error. And I'll give a custom message also saying you must be above the age of 18 to apply a DL. All right. So this is my custom message. And if this doesn't happen, what were we doing? We'll say print you can apply. Clear? Now from here, how were we calling it? We were calling it using a try block, and we will, whatever we want to apply it with, whatever parameters we want to pass to apply, and we are going to accept age to small error as E, and we are going to print. I'm just printing the message. Okay. Nothing, I'm not adding any custom message here. I'm just printing whatever I'm getting from. All right. Let's run this code. So what have we done here? We have created a custom exception class, which is raised here when the age is less than 18. If it is not, then we'll get, you can apply a DL. So for now, we are hitting 18 here, or we are entering it. We are entering 18, right? So what do we get? Let's run this. So we are getting, you can apply a DL. All right. Now, if we change this to 17, and if we run this, what happens? So it says you must be above the age of 18 to apply a DL, which is raised as an exception here. That's all I had for today. So what we had gone through today is using try block and using raise to throw error when something goes wrong logically. And we had seen how to draft custom error messages. We had also seen how to create our own exception classes. Then I think it's a wrap for today, and I'll see you in the next one where we talk about oops concept in Python. See you in the next one. Bye bye.